Welcome in, everybody, to the 5th episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. I am Blake Wallis, your host, joined by my co-host and great friend, Jake Aron.
Hello, hello.
Today, Jake and I break down this week's popular Super Bowl takes and hand out grades to quarterbacks, coaches, and defenses. Oh my. We cross over to the NBA trade deadline. Who won and why was it the Knicks? We discuss the question, now what for the Knicks? And finally, the current featherweight champ, the former pound-for-pound ranked number one fighter, Alexander Volkanovski, takes on the young and dangerous Ilia Topuria in a fantastic matchup with gold on the line. I have some potentially hot takes for that main card. Listeners will not want to miss a minute of today's show. You can find the Blake and Jake Show on Spotify and YouTube. That's at the Blake and Jake Show. You can additionally find all of our stuff on Instagram at the Blake and Jake Show. That will have no spaces in there, but is spelt the exact same way. Jake, why don't you go ahead and take it away with the weekly sports news update?
All right. Thank you so much, Blake. So Super Bowl 58 was one of the most watched Super Bowl television programs in U.S. television history. An average of 123.4 million people tuned in across CBS, Paramount Plus, Univision, and Nickelodeon, which featured commentary from SpongeBob SquarePants. Altogether, more than 200 people watched at least some part of the game. This Super Bowl was the most watched television broadcast since the 1969 Apollo 11 moon landing, which averaged between 125 and 150 million viewers.
Wow. And let me tell you, the game was worth it. I think so many people just underrated that game. It was close until the end. I think you could have seen that coming. Great game. I'm not shocked.
Yeah, it was a fun one. Moving on in baseball news, the Oakland A's made some positive headlines in what seems like for the first time in a long time, as yesterday they named Jenny Cavnar as the first female play-by-play announcer in Major League Baseball history. Cavnar had been in the media business for 20 years and covered baseball for the past 17. She spent the last 12 years as a backup play-by-play announcer, pregame and postgame host, and reporter for the Colorado Rockies, and previously covered the San Diego Padres for nearly 5 years as a reporter and an anchor. In more recent news, this morning it was announced that Chiefs signed defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo to a contract extension, although the terms of the deal have not been disclosed. Spagnuolo led the Chiefs to the second-best scoring defense in the regular season and in the postseason. The Chiefs kept 4 of the 6 highest-scoring teams in the league to an average of less than 16 points per game. Spagnuolo obviously had the players' respect. During the playoffs, they made T-shirts that said, "In Spags We Trust." And most importantly, as I'm sure you know, he helped the Chiefs win the Super Bowl. He now has 3 Super Bowl wins with the Chiefs.
Yeah, certainly spectacular. That's Jake with the weekly sports news update.
All right, so as we know, the Super Bowl wrapped up on Sunday. The game was close, but the Chiefs exited overtime victorious 25-22. So I want to hear some of your great takes about Super Bowl, but first, let's hand out some grades for the final game of the NFL season.
Yeah, some grades. So you're going to see on all of these, I kind of follow the same pattern. We're going to talk about the San Francisco counterpart, then move over to Kansas City. We're going to start with the defense of the San Francisco 49ers. And I'll be honest, a lot of people might be hating a little bit on the 49ers for some of those late drives, but I had to give the 49ers a B+. They forced 5 fumbles during the game. They intercepted a pass from Patrick Mahomes. I think everybody knows how hard that is to do. The broadcast definitely made sure all the fans did. And I don't think we saw the same Patrick Mahomes as soon as that pick was gone, and then Patrick Mahomes retook the field on offense. It was a different Patrick. He was locked in. He was taking everything the defense gave him. Didn't really force anything, and just relied on him and Andy Reid to kind of eventually find a way to beat that defense. But I think Nick Bosa hit Mahomes 3 times. I don't think you could ask a lot more from a player. Fred Warner was everywhere. That's their who I think is probably the 49ers' top defensive player, and really stood out. Didn't have a bad game himself. Really stopped Mahomes and Reid rhythm early in that game, and especially the scripted plays in the first half. I think I expected in my head the Chiefs to get out to a little bit of an early lead, just getting off that hot start, using those Andy Reid cooked up plays. When he has multiple weeks, it's proven just how good he is, and I expected to see a little bit more of that, but I gave my hats off to that San Fran defense in that first half, because I felt like, yes, the Chiefs were able to move the ball a little bit, but of course those turnovers helped, and you're able to just keep slowing up on Patrick Mahomes and really kept Purdy in a pretty good spot to win that game throughout. So I gave the defense of San Fran a B+. What did you give them?
Yeah, I actually gave him a B. So through 60 minutes of regulation, the 49ers only allowed Kansas City to score one touchdown, and that touchdown came after the muffed punt that gave him the ball at the 16-yard line. I feel like Mahomes' rushing kind of destroyed the Niners. I'm thinking back to the 4th and 1 play in overtime. He also had a 19-yard scramble that led to game-winning points. That was just a couple plays later, but that's not enough to completely rag on defense. They still did a really good job. So. I give him a B.
Yeah, and just one of the harder things to judge about what San Francisco and their defense was able to do was, and especially Steve Wilkes calling a great game plan. I think that was part of it. It's just that everything was in line as far as that San Francisco 49ers defense, especially in that first half. I do think they just kind of got worn down and tired towards the end, and that was when Patrick Mahomes was able to find those running rooms that just were not open earlier in the game. But 5 fumbles, yet I believe only one of those were actually recovered by San Francisco. 4 of them were recovered by the Chiefs, and that's a tough loss. That really is, because that's one of those numbers. Getting the fumble is a skill thing. Collecting the fumble can be completely just this wide open, random part of the game. And that part of the game went in the Chiefs' favor, I think much to the Chiefs' delight, because I think that with those extra turnovers that could have been created, could Purdy have gotten 3 on a possession? Could he have gotten 7 on a possession? The game would have looked a little bit different had San Fran had a little bit of a lead early on. That's the kind of one thing, but you can't really fault the defense for not collecting these fumbles. Moving on to the defense of Kansas City, and I am so excited to talk about the defense of Kansas City because it was led by and tackles and I believe in quarterback hits by Nick Bolton. Nick Bolton is from Mizzou, was spectacular here at Mizzou, went pretty, was it late? I'm blinking a little bit here. It was late first round or early second round, but just made waves on this Kansas City Chiefs defense. And Steve Spagnuolo has got to be completely impressed and love to have this character day in, day out. And just in these big moments, these leaders step up and take their place. And I think Nick Bolton is one of those players that did that and kind of cements himself as the face of this new spectacular defense that didn't really have a name other than Chris Jones on it before the year began.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings is that big time players make big time plays in big time games, and it seems like Bolton definitely did that last game.
Yeah, certainly. And I got to say, 13 tackles. He hit Purdy twice, but Trent McDuffie out of Washington was insane to me. And it's kind of watching the Super Bowl over is really hard to see how corners do, just because the camera's not on them until just that point when the ball kind of comes down into the apex of a catch. And so you don't get to see all the work that a corner does, but Trent McDuffie was doing all the work. And you could just tell, I mean, Deebo Samuel was held like in check for the entire game. You think about how much money the 49ers have dedicated to Deebo and what a weapon Deebo is. And then the Kansas City Chiefs were able to more or less take him and George Kittle out of the game. That credit has got to go to Steve Spagnuolo, but also Trent McDuffie, Nick Bolton, and the rest of that Kansas City defense. Like I said, if you can get 2 of another team's top players to really not contribute, that's a win. So for this Kansas City defense, I've got to give it an A+. They did exactly, I mean, you can take away an option, like a top 3 option, but taking away 2 of the top 3 options, to me, that's a definite win. I think the Kansas City Chiefs deserve an A+ for that effort.
So I gave him an A. I am just thinking back to highlights I remember from the game, and the one thing I remember is that they got kind of caught behind on that trick play. So that's what I'm thinking of. But other than that, there really weren't a whole lot of negatives that you could say about this defense. So I'm going with an A, but I can totally see your A+.
And what I like here as we move into the coaches section is just how much harder of a grader you are than I. And I think that's so clear. And I'm sure listeners can pick up on that as well. We move into the coaching. I'm going to start with Kyle Shanahan, and this may just be my roughest grade. And reports on ESPN are going to claim that there was an overtime plan that the 49ers had put in place before the playoffs, and they have never reviewed it up into the Super Bowl. And I don't feel like that would have been so big of an issue against pretty much any other team. But when you're going up against the brain trust of Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, their GM, and Patrick Mahomes, I think you have to coach like it's the last game of your life just to compete with these guys. So if you leave any stone unturned, which I do believe that Kyle Shanahan did, then you're putting yourself at a real disadvantage and you're accepting a real disadvantage. That's tough. You already knew Andy Reid is dominant off bye weeks. If you give him extra time for a game, he's going to bring a little bit of something extra to the game. And that's what happened. I just think that Andy Reid outcoached Kyle Shanahan. And I don't think that these teams had any real deficit between each other too much more than on the sidelines. I think that Andy Reid and what he was able to do late versus what Kyle Shanahan was attempting to do late, I think the biggest grade boost has to be between Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan for how they conducted themselves in those moments. And I'm not going to bang on Kyle Shanahan as much as everybody else. He's clearly spectacular in the offensive coordinator role, but head coaching is a totally different thing. Andy Reid's been a head coach for a billion years now and has every step of that process just nailed down. So I can't find myself incredibly shocked that Andy Reid ended up kind of taking a huge advantage in that matchup.
Yeah, one thing I feel like I'm going to disagree with you here is and this might be pretty controversial, but I honestly think that Shanahan made the right decision to receive the kickoff or at the beginning of overtime. The Chiefs hadn't scored a touchdown all game when they had like the length of the field. I know he's getting hate for that decision. It seems really odd to me. Obviously, I don't know what happened. I wasn't there, but it seems really odd to me that they really just didn't review the overtime situation. I don't know. That just seems like too big of a stone unturned. But I gave him a C. I think he did a pretty good job. He got the team there. But he just once again couldn't get the job done.
Yeah, he has a heart. It's good to see Jake Aron having a heart. Grading him a little bit higher than me, but that's okay. I think we saw pretty eye to eye on those things. Now, it's just simply a numbers thing because you got to think about it the opposite way. If you go down there and you score, well, now Patrick Mahomes has to go score a touchdown. That means it's 4-down territory throughout. It's not necessarily 4-down territory. If you give it to him first, you get a stop. And then it's kind of the ball's in your hand. I do think that the right move with the new rules is to go ahead and defer and kick off, see what their offense can do, and then match it. Because then can you use all 4 of those downs? Should you use all 4 of those downs? It makes sense to me, and I just wonder how dialed into this new overtimes rule Kyle Shanahan really was. How much time was really put into it? Did he put any time into it? Was that an assistant coach that he handed that part of the game off to, and it kind of got lost by the wayside? Because it did feel like the Kansas City Chiefs were much more prepared post game going into overtime than the 49ers were. Yeah. That moves. Oh, did you have something on that?
I agree with that. Yeah. Just something I saw is that he apparently referred to their analytics department. That was who he went to make that decision.
Interesting. Now we're talking about Andy Reid, and I'm going to change my entire tune because Andy Reid was spectacular throughout that game. And I'll be honest, I had a few questions because of just how much trouble the Chiefs were having early. And, of course, it was the fumbles. I wasn't going to stress about that. If you're going, 5, 6 plays, and then you have a fumble, like, your offense was successful up until a point. And I feel like Andy Reid knew that, stayed real calm. And then what I grabbed the most from that entire game was a couple of screens he called in overtime, because it really wasn't a screen-heavy game up until that point. And there was screen, 9, 8, 7, taking apart a defense that really was on their heels to begin with, just going into overtime. Then Andy Reid hitting them with a different tempo, a different play style, with a different end game in mind, with a different strategy in mind. I just don't think that the 49ers entered the extra I was going to say extra innings, but entered the extra time trying to think about how to get ahead of the Chiefs. It was more of like, okay, how do we go out there and play some more football? And I think the Chiefs went back to their sideline and said, okay, what can we throw at them now that they'll just never see coming? Like, where's our knockout punch? And I think that Andy Reid had that knockout punch loaded, sent it right down the pipes. And the other thing I want to call out here, and it's a little tough to do this here, I'm going to do this rather than talk about Patrick Mahomes. 2 of those touchdown passes were incredibly wide open. The first one to Kelsey, which I think a lot less people throughout the week have talked about, but that was a complete design touchdown as well. And then McCole Hardman catching the game-winning touchdown with nobody in his area code. To me, that should be given just as much credit to Andy Reid as it should be to Patrick Mahomes. Sticking with the game plan throughout, you never see the Chiefs panic. That has to also be a credit to Andy Reid. Hiring Spagnuolo has to be a big check in Andy Reid's cap to be able to be like, okay, I've got the offense. I'm comfortable with this. I'm going to turn the entire defense over to you, Spags, and we're going to see exactly what you can make it. And then, because they pay Patrick Mahomes because they want to pay a certain few guys, they can't pay others. It's the reality of the sport. Every team's dealing with the same thing, but Spags is able to kind of shoulder the load there. I know that the Reid had to lose some wide receivers, namely Tyreek Hill, but also that defense took a few shots and lost a lot of good players. I can think of Tyrann Mathieu off the cuff right there, and just impact players, and then able to replace them cheaply has been an A-plus system throughout, just not even the Super Bowl. Andy Reid, Spagnuolo, the Kansas City Chiefs, A-plus throughout. They're the only team that can claim they've had a better season than the Houston Texans so far. So, hey. All right. I am interested to hear what you have that take on Andy Reid.
Yeah, so continuing, I guess, my streak of being heartless, I gave Andy Reid an A. So there was one play that's
heartless.
there was one play that stuck out to me, and that I feel like we would be talking about a lot more if the Chiefs had lost. So Travis Kelce caught a 9-yard pass at the Chiefs about 2-yard line. But it appeared that they didn't exactly give him the spot, which led to 3rd and 1, I believe. Andy Reid called a timeout there, but he called the timeout to draw up the next play as opposed to challenging that field position. The Chiefs didn't end up getting the first down there, and they had to punt. They won. So obviously that's mostly forgotten, but I feel like that would have been a lot talked about a lot more had they not won, considering that they had to punt, and I feel like they would have gotten the spot. So that's why I give him an A. But hindsight's 2020. I think other than that, he did a very, very good job leading this Chiefs team once again.
An extremely tough grader here, just giving Andy Reid an A, not an A+. I won't take it personally. We're moving into the quarterbacks. Let's go ahead and start with the San Fran quarterback, Brock Purdy. And before I speak, I actually just want to hear your thoughts. What grade did you give Brock Purdy, and why did you give it to him?
I gave Brock Purdy a B. He played conservatively, which is fine. I feel like he kind of tried to let the defense win the game, so to speak. His receivers struggled to get open a little bit, which is fine. That's not on him. I like that he didn't really force too many passes, but he didn't play well enough to get the win. Like I said, I think he did play kind of conservatively. I would have liked to see a little more aggression from him, just a little bit. Maybe it would have been a different outcome, but I give him a B. What about you?
I gave Brock Purdy a B+. Now, and I have to say, I had my doubts about Brock Purdy going in. And my measurement was, of course, like everybody else, Jimmy Garoppolo. Yes, but Jimmy Garoppolo got the 49ers that looked quite similar to the Super Bowl. So is Brock Purdy much different from a skills standpoint? And despite the loss, I came away thinking Brock Purdy is so much more different than Jimmy Garoppolo. You got to understand how different these two players were in their career leading up into their first Super Bowl. Like Jimmy Garoppolo had been around for quite some time as, a player sitting behind Tom Brady going to Super Bowls, and then gets to be the kind of guy. He had a very natural, very healthy progression into being a starting quarterback for a very good team. And I just wasn't impressed with what he was able to do in the biggest moments. That's my breakdown of Jimmy Garoppolo. But then when I looked at Brock Purdy and you see a young guy drafted the very last pick of the draft, and yet I saw a ton more composure. I saw better throw decisions. I didn't see all the throws that I love to see, but I'm not so caught up to reality here. I remember Jimmy Garoppolo in 2019, and I can tell you that I am much more comfortable with Brock Purdy throwing the ball for my team than I would be for Jimmy Garoppolo, and his throw selection as well. I just think that Brock Purdy sees things in a better way than Jimmy Garoppolo does, definitely faster than he does as well. So, and it wasn't the greatest game for him. But I don't see that as entirely on him. In fact, I put a little bit on Shanahan as well. If you have two different weapons, two of your top weapons that just aren't getting any sort of traction in your game, by the third quarter, it needs to be an SOS. It needs to be, okay, we pay that guy this much because we think he's this valuable to our team. Right now, we are either not using that valuable, that invaluableness, or they're no longer valuable. And I don't think that the issue is that Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are by the wayside. I don't think that that's the situation there. I just don't think they were put in tremendous spots to succeed. And if Kyle Shanahan is what everybody wants to anoint him to be, which is one of the best, if not the best young coach in the league, then I think there's got to be more in these situations. And I think there's got to be more creativity from his spot in big moments, because I think Brock Purdy did exactly kind of what you would expect from a guy in his first Super Bowl and his second playoff run and his second, third year in the league. It's insane. And then just the spot that he was in, which was very undercovered in this entire Super Bowl event, was just the Brock Purdy situation. The fact that he was going up against what is likely the GOAT quarterback and maybe the GOAT coach, and he has great things, but it's so young. It's so young in his career. It's just a lot to put on anybody, especially the last pick in the draft just a few years ago. So I gave him a B+, but that moves us into Patrick Mahomes. Now, I gave Patrick Mahomes an A-. Could I give him an A with an interception, though? Because if I could, I probably would. These quarterbacks, nobody's like Patrick Mahomes. And when I say these quarterbacks, I mean a very select two quarterbacks, Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. The understanding of how the game should be played, and then playing it to a T, not just in the first quarter, not the second quarter, not just a third quarter, and then maybe 5 minutes into the fourth, and then if things aren't going right, they panic. Just the ability to play mistake-free football when it's time, to turn it on, is incredible. That's the one thing that those two quarterbacks share, and they're best. Their close and intermediate passing ranges are their accuracy is exceptional. Yet it's also just knowing when to take your risks, when not to take your risks, and when to just let the other team beat themselves. And I really do think that Patrick Mahomes, after that interception, went out there and just said, I'm going to make all the plays they give me. If this comes down to 1 to 2 plays, I think from then on, Patrick Mahomes was extremely confident that those 2 plays were going to be in his favor and not in the 49ers' favor. And it really did just come down to a few plays all night. And that's what I don't understand. There's so many people saying, hey, this game isn't really good. And especially some people that were around us, a little boring was the thought process. But I loved every bit of it, honestly. I thought it was neck and neck. I thought at first San Fran was controlling the lines of scrimmages, and I felt that I still thought that Patrick Mahomes was playing a great game up until the point. I know there were fumbles all over the place. Even the interception, it was like, ouch. That hurts. But I wasn't worried at any point that Kansas City wasn't going to be able to climb back from the deficits they were putting themselves at. And I think as it came into the third and fourth quarter, just kind of expecting the Chiefs to win, it was like, well, I don't think the 49ers have done enough. At every point, it was like, 49ers should have more points here, because it's almost Chiefs time. And when it's Chiefs time, and when I mean Chiefs time, I mean it's Patrick Mahomes time. And as soon as it turned on, it was a totally different game. So for Patrick Mahomes, part of his credit should be attributed to that play and calling. Like I said, 2 of his touchdown passes, both to Kelsey and Hardman, and the Kelsey one is talked about a lot less, just were major space. There was just nobody in the area code. So yeah, I think that breaks down each one of those grades, but I have a few other takes there. And the first one, I'm going to start out hot. We're going special teams here, because that is the one area we did not really talk about. Harrison Butker. I think he could take the spot as the best kicker in the NFL now. And I don't think that take shows any steam. I think that's a solid pick now. I know that the Ravens and Justin Tucker had held on to that for quite some time, but I just can't see anybody else being a more consistent and a better long-range kicker than Harrison Butker.
Yeah, the kick he made, was it 57?
It was long. Yeah, it was 54, 55, 56, 57.
It was very, very impressive. It was very impressive, and I think he really cemented himself as one of the best right now.
And has had a solid year. One of the best year as well. It's not like he didn't have a campaign before the playoffs. This isn't like some crazy reaction to one game or just the playoffs. All year he's been the best kicker in the league. It's just not covered enough, but definitely has kind of shown himself to be the top guy. And with that, the similarities between the Patriots dynasty and the current Chiefs dynasty really begin to show, don't they? Best kicker, I've heard that before. Best quarterback, I've heard that before. Best short intermediate pass game, Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady, I've heard that before. Best head coaching mind, I've heard that before. You know what? And the smartest head coach combo, quarterback combo, we've heard it before. But there's one thing that this Chiefs team has that potentially makes them better than the Patriots dynasty. And that's the coaching dynamic of these teams, right? It was all led by Belichick. Now, Belichick had a little bit of this as well, but even more so with Andy Reid being able to work with Patrick Mahomes one-on-one and just create these amazing offenses and just these intelligent offenses, these well-run offenses that always seem to get their stuff right. Even this year when it was doubted, by week 6, week 7, the Chiefs were back to really winning games at a solid rate as they have been. This year there was a few stumbles, but nothing really that held the Chiefs down. Nobody thought the Chiefs weren't going to make it into the playoffs. It's not like they fell majorly throughout the year. The Chiefs have just been what the Patriots were, but the Chiefs have this awesome marriage between Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, but they also have Spagnuolo, who's not going to be a head coach anytime soon. And in fact, after the Super Bowl, I wanted to almost pitch, should Spagnuolo be a head coach? Because he's clearly one of the best coordinators in the game. Now, not all head coaches or coordinators should be head coaches. It's not the same job, and I certainly understand that. And you talked about the extension that the Chiefs rightfully gave Steve Spagnuolo, but I mean, that little trio right there, that nucleus, let's call it a nucleus. I like the word nucleus for this conversation. That nucleus is something that is stronger than the Patriots had. And if it can stay together, which is, we've talked about Andy Reid possibly retiring and all these different things, but if that nucleus can stay together, I think this Chiefs team could possibly overshadow that Patriots dynasty. Because right now, if we want to talk about it, if we're doing like a little goats race and we're taking Patrick Mahomes back and putting him where Tom Brady was at the same age, I think Patrick Mahomes would have a little bit, if not a sizable lead at this moment in that GOAT debate. What would you say about that?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think it would be close. I don't know about a huge lead though. I do have a question for you. What do you think is the one thing that could potentially ruin what the Chiefs has right now? Could it be Andy Reid retiring?
Andy Reid retiring would 100% send this entire dynasty talk into a totally different direction. And I'm not sure it would be a direction that they would want to, that would be a good direction. I don't think it could be a good direction. I don't think you can go from a head coach like that. What else is out there? I mean, technically this year there's better coaches than ever, but there's still not an Andy Reid out there. You're not going to find one. Yeah, I mean, I think Kelsey's expendable. Honestly, I don't think you can lose Mahomes. I don't think outside of that nucleus anybody could go except for the general manager. I think the general manager we can add into that nucleus. But as long as that stature, that intelligence, that unidirectional front office stays together, that nucleus stays together, it's keep Patrick Mahomes, let the coaches figure out the rest of the roster, do the best you can, set up your guys as best you can, especially if you're Brett Veach, and let this team run. Because if you can keep that nucleus together, I don't think there's any part outside of that you could take away from this Chiefs team that they wouldn't suddenly be, this different team. All right. I think that ends the very first segment of our show. We are going to send it to a quick break. You're listening to KCOU 88.1. This is the Blake and Jake Show. Welcome into the Blake and Jake Show. I've got two more segments. We've got basketball, NBA, and MMA, some UFC talk coming up your way. But let's go ahead and kick into it. Jake, go ahead and get us started on our first segment. Hit me.
All right, Blake, let's talk trades. So first, let's talk about the major trades. I think that the New York Knicks won the trade deadline, right? Right? Would you agree with that?
I think so.
So what now? What's next for the New York Knicks?
Well, I think that the Knicks are somebody to talk about. But before we get into just the Knicks, I want you to go ahead and talk to me about just each one of these trades. Go ahead and highlight some trades. Go ahead and start with the Mavericks. I'll pick it up after the Mavericks because I don't know if listeners are aware, but Jake here is a Mavericks fan, so he gets to do Maverick stuff.
Yes, I am. All right. So in a trade that I very much like, the Mavs got P.J. Washington from the Hornets. They also got a 2024 second-round pick and a 2028 second-round pick. In return, the Hornets got Grant Williams and Seth Curry. They also got a 2027 first-round pick.
On that trade alone, and then we'll continue on to these other trades, what are your thoughts on who won that trade?
Well, I am biased, but I think that the Mavs won that trade. Ignoring the picks, I have not been a huge fan of Grant Williams. I don't think he's been playing all that well for us this season. I also saw some reports recently that apparently other players might not have been too happy with him. And in terms of Seth Curry, he was on the Mavs a couple of years ago, and then he got back with the Mavs. In his second stint with the Mavs, he didn't play terrible, but he mostly he didn't play very much. So I don't think we were giving up too much. PJ Washington, I am a fan of PJ Washington, especially more and so now that he's on the Mavs. But I think this was a pretty good trade for the Mavs.
I think so too. The Mavs have been very interesting in their moves in the last few years surrounding Luka Doncic. I've liked some sets that they've had around them, and then they move it before it seems like they give it 2 tries. They don't give it 2 tries. They give it 1 try, and I feel like there's some teams that have deserved another try, and maybe it's because of just cap issues or one thing or another, but haven't been able to just run it back and give it a second try. So it feels like they're kind of playing musical chairs at some positions there. Hopefully, P.J. Washington fills that. A great player out of Charlotte, but nobody ever gets to see because who watches Charlotte Hornet basketball? Next trade, though, and I'll go ahead and take it over from here. The Pacers have finally gotten rid of Buddy Hield, a name that had been on the sharpening market for quite some time now. And what the Pacers got might have been a little bit of a haul for a player that's been shopped or rumored to be shopped for quite a few years. The Pacers were able to get Furkan Korkmaz, and I'll be honest, Korkmaz, I like Korkmaz as a player, as a guard, especially offensively. They also get a guard in Doug McDermott. That's out of Creighton. Father coached him there. 2024 second-round pick from the Raptors, a 2029 second-round pick from the Blazers, and some cash from the 76ers. And then, of course, the Spurs also got Marcus Morris, a second-round pick from the Clippers, and some cash considerations, making it all work. Now, I don't know. The 76ers are an interesting team, especially because of Joel Embiid coming out. I think that Buddy Hield would have been a fantastic part of that had he remained healthy. And if Embiid, I'm not sure if Embiid's out for the season.
I don't think he's out for the season, but he's gone for a while. And
it's up to the 76ers to keep fighting for a place. But, I mean, once Embiid comes back, you move Hield to maybe a bench role. I think that's some extra shooting for the 76ers. It makes sense on their little run that they're going to add some shooting pieces for their backups. And Korkmaz is a guard you can give the ball to as well. I like what he does with the ball. I think maybe his defense could get him into some trouble. But offensively, Korkmaz is very skilled. Moving on, the Thunder get Gordon Hayward, who is still playing basketball. The Hornets making moves here, and really, Gordon Hayward was with the Celtics before that, in kind of the eye of the basketball world, and then suddenly disappeared. It's because the Hornets got him. The Hornets instead get Micic, Trey Mans, Davis Bertans, who great shooter, by the way. 2024 second-round pick from the Rockets and the 2025 second-round pick from the 76ers. And for this one, I'm going to ask you, who won this trade, and do you have a why for me? Because this is a weird trade. It's hard to create an opinion off this trade too much.
Yeah, I'm going to say that the Thunder definitely well, not definitely, but they did win this trade. I think that they needed a veteran presence because they have a really, really young team. And although Gordon Hayward might not give them the best production on the court, but I think he'll definitely be an off-the-court spark for that team.
That's certainly a great take. I look at it and I see Gordon Hayward as like a very good veteran to add that doesn't have to kind of prove himself really by scoring a bunch of points. These guys are young on the Thunder. All of them are young. All of them are going to look up to Gordon Hayward. Gordon Hayward has something for these young guys. And when you look at what the Thunder gave up, except for Bertans, I don't really see any of this being useful stuff for the Thunder and what they've got going on at this time. Trey Mann is an interesting guard, but not really a fit for what the Thunder have. Micic, I'm unfamiliar with the game, but Bertans is a shooter I think any team can have, but it does give you that defensive liability. That's something that they can now give the Hornets a bunch of shooting, a bunch of fun, and get Gordon Hayward, a nice veteran player who can still give good minutes, some good offense. So I think a great pick there. Now, getting into some of the Knicks moves here, and really the highlight of this show, the Knicks getting Alec Burks and Bogdan Bogdanovic, and the Pistons getting Evan Fournier, Malachi Flynn, Quentin Grimes, Ryan, I'm not going to say the name, 2 future second-round picks and cash consideration. Now, Alec Burks played on the Knicks already, went to Pistons, and the Knicks said, we got to have him again. A good backup kind of point guard player, whether it be shooting guard, point guard. He can play sort of both roles at a decent clip, enough for the Lakers to get by. But really, it's Bogdan Bogdanovic who stands out here. Cannot be overlooked. His shooting, his defense really was one of those premier 3-and-D guys on a Jazz team that was considered very high and highly touted, and definitely was a reason for that, both on offense and defense. Great ad for the Knicks. I think if you talk about things that the Knicks needed, is a little bit more of the finer things, some of the shooting, some of the offensive skill and talent. I think you add a little bit of that. I think this gives the opportunity for the Knicks not to just get so defensive oriented and get in these shooting droughts. And Bogdan Bogdanovic, just the perfect kind of veteran to add to a team that's cooking right now. He's not going to get in the way of what you've already got going with all these different players. And Alec Burks has, you got to think, if the Knicks were willing to trade to get Alec Burks back, they really wanted Alec Burks. So I just think that the Knicks knew in that trade what they were wanting and not really giving up too many pieces. Evan Fournier is interesting. Outside of that, all of that stuff is kind of just stuff that's not really useful for the Knicks. So I think that was a great trade there. Really for both teams, though. I think the Pistons got a lot of interesting things to work with, you know. So that will be something that the Pistons get to see what they can do with. The Knicks. And another trade, this happened a little bit earlier into the trade deadline, something we could have covered weeks ago, but I think we just knew there was more coming from the Knicks. Knicks get OG Anunoby, Malachi Flynn, and Precious Achua. Yep. And the Raptors get RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and a 2024 second-round pick from Detroit. Now, that's just one of those moves. OG Anunoby, that's a glue guy right there. You fit him in. He does anything a coach wants of him on the floor, offense, defense, gives you a lot and just works hard worker. The kind of Nick that would become a Nick. It's just a perfect Nick. I really do think that was the greatest skill there. Now, the underrated portion of this is Mitchell Robinson, usually coming out with some injuries throughout the year, playing that center spot. Getting Precious Achiuwa is interesting because he's very physical, dominant, has the physical tools to be great. Maybe the footwork's not great, but it does give them a great option there at that center position if they want to continue going with aggressive defense and so often. I think that Precious Achiuwa is a good ad there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the things that I've noticed, the Knicks had all these really good trades. They didn't give up a single first-round pick for any of these guys. So I think they did a really good job getting guys that they either know that they like or guys that know will work with their system, with Tom Thibodeau's system. So I think they did a really good job with their trades.
I think that's why they get the title as the best team to come out of the trade deadline, just because I think it was a lot of moves. It didn't risk any future moves. You still have a lot of pieces to work with. You didn't really get rid of any of your assets. You got a lot of good pieces there that could still win this year. And when you look at that East, right now, currently fourth, and I mean, the Celtics look tough and the Bucks are going to be tough, but I don't think any team's going to want to match up against the Knicks even before these trades. Now, so doubly, I just think that the Knicks could offer something on offense now that they haven't in years past that kind of made the Knicks an okay matchup. I think a lot of those top teams would say, if we got the Knicks, we just have to play really well, and eventually their offense will let them down. But this year, it just feels like maybe the Knicks have got that covered. And it gets interesting. The West is scary, but they just have to focus on the East, and I think the Knicks have a possibility to at least play spoiler to one of those teams above them. All right, we got one more trade. It kind of fell into the bottom here, but I want to go ahead and hear your thoughts anyway because I have some thoughts on this. Go ahead and give us that last Mavericks trade before we get into UFC 298, Volkanovski versus Topuria.
All right, so for this last Mavs trade, the Mavs got Daniel Gafford, and they gave up Rashawn Holmes and a 2024 first-round pick for the Thunder. Once again, this is a trade that I like. I think that Daniel Gafford is a good player. He's going to be somebody that I think will play well with Luka. Rashawn Holmes has been good. Not great, but I am a fan of this trade.
Yeah, I got to say I'm more of a fan of this trade than you are because I love Daniel Gafford. Now, part of that's because I'm a recovering betting addict, and Daniel Gafford could be a double-double on any night. He's got a lot of rebounds. I think that's something the Mavs are going to benefit from, having a bigger center that can set better screens. And Derek Lively, I think, is kind of what they're going for. But Derek Lively has been so good. It's up to the Mavs to not mess up those center minutes because I think you can get a good influx of different aspects of each game that you can kind of sub in and out for each other. I think that Gafford's great for the overall offense for the Mavs, and I think plays a little bit better defensively. But then Derek Lively adds like a physical young element. He's just a hustler. You don't want him off the floor. So the Mavs have to kind of weigh that a little bit, one against the other. But other than that, I think that the Mavs made some very good trades. I think they get that silver medal for second best team in the trade deadline of this year. Now moving on, go ahead and send us into 298.
All right, yeah, let's talk 298. The main card is Volkanovski versus Topuria. So Blake, what are your takes on the main card?
This main card is interesting. Now, we're going to start with, I think, the smallest fight, but I've got something for every one of these 5 fights in the main card here. And there's definitely some fights in the prelims that fans might want to tune in for. Both of the women's fights for this, Miranda Maverick's fighting, and spectacular fighter. Her opponent spectacular. I think both of these women matchups are just incredible. There is a matchup between Rogerio de Lima versus Justin Tafa that is just going to be fireworks. So interesting. But really get into this 5. They're a good 5. And to start it off, I got a little bit of a surprise here. When I looked at the top 5 fights here before they even came out with the betting lines, and I saw Roman Kopylov versus Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, I said, oh, that's Roman Kopylov all day. Now, I admittedly have met a lot of criticism of that take, and maybe I'm thinking I'm on an island by myself, but when you watch these two fighters, the crisper fighter is Roman Kopylov. I think the way that he throws his strikes are special. I think he finds chins. I don't know if Anthony is so refined in his game, but Anthony Fernandez has a thing for taking down a lot of different players and a lot of different fighters, and I think could possibly drown out Kopylov a little bit here, but I'm not going to back off my take here. My take for the very first fight of the night is that Roman Kopylov will beat Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. And I think it's a step up in competition for Roman Kopylov, but I think he's ready for it. I think that his skills, at least on the feet, have proven themselves. He will have a test on the ground. That's kind of why this matchup is interesting. But Hernandez has quite the work cut out for him getting to Roman Kopylov, and I think that's where Roman Kopylov will get it done. What are your thoughts on that very first fight?
Yeah, I actually have Hernandez taking this fight. Hernandez is good. He's 11-2, but his wrestling skills might not be enough to make Kopylov tired. I feel like Kopylov is going to try to like stay away from Hernandez long enough, kind of to just tire him out when he's ready. He'll take him out. But I think it's going to be an interesting fight.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting in those early exchanges to see kind of how does Kopylov manage the distance and space with a possible wrestler, because so far he's been able to dictate space incredible, and he's been getting knockouts for it. So I don't think that your thought is so crazy, because I actually looked, and according to, I believe, like ESPN bets, I think Roman Kopylov was like a dog, like a 240 dog, which is wild. I don't see eye to eye with that. Moving on into our second event, I believe Merab Dvalishvili defeats Henry Cejudo, and I don't think that's such a crazy take there. What are your thoughts on that immediately, Jake?
Yeah, I have Dvalishvili winning by decision. He's 16-4 to the 16-3. He's 4 years younger. I think he's gonna win just because he's gonna overmatch. I don't know if he's enough, if he's gonna have enough to knock him out, but I think he could win after all the rounds.
Yeah, this is an interesting style fight. Of course, everybody knows Henry Cejudo is an Olympic wrestler, yet Merab Dvalishvili probably has the better MMA wrestling. Just spams the takedown button. If you're playing UFC with this guy, he's hitting one button only, and he's going for your legs. He's trying to take you down. And Merab can do it over and over and over again. Gas tank has never really been an issue for Merab, and I think this could be an issue for Henry Cejudo, who is definitely up there in age. It has been a long time since his last win. I believe it's been 4 years. He lost in a matchup versus Sterling, but that just isn't Merab Dvalishvili's path right now. They're not on the same trajectory. In fact, his last wins include Aldo and Peter Yan. Those are big wins, and that just shows his growth. And I don't know that Henry Cejudo has been necessarily showing that growth. I do think this is an interesting style fight. Does Merab Dvalishvili defeat Henry Cejudo using his wrestling? Can Cejudo somehow show that he can stop just the relentless takedowns and resets and the takedowns and the resets that Dvalishvili gives? And despite being kind of boring, because all of his fights are going to go to a decision, you're going to see 15 minutes until he gets to tournament or championship time, and then he's going to be 25-minute long fights, and that's possibly why he hasn't gotten a title shot so far. But simply put, he's spectacular, and it's kind of impressive what he's able to do. They're heavy effort performances, and I really think that's all Dana White should be asking for there. Henry Cejudo also firing his coach on an UFC embedded video this week, just like a week up before the fight. The week of the fight is quite peculiar to me, and Cejudo seems like he's always trying to grab eyes, so I understand this might not be so effective for him, but when you're doing that so much, I wonder how much your head is in the game. And Dvalishvili his head's in the game. So Cejudo has a chance to get run over in this matchup. That's at least my opinion there. Moving into the third fight, and this one's interesting. Ian Gary, a quick turnaround here, is looking to fight Geoff Neal, and I think he finds success on Saturday night. The question really is Geoff Neal going to be somebody different in this fight? Because simply put, I don't think the output that he's put out in previous fights will stand up to Ian Gary's pressure. If Ian Gary pressures Neal, though, and Neal shows a different level, maybe when he's being pressured, when he's being felt like he's being attacked, he's a little bit more aggressive. That's going to be needed, because it's not going to be one shot that takes Ian Gary. It's going to have to be 2 or 3. He's clever. He moves really well. And I think for this fight, because the power will definitely be in Neal's hands, I believe he's going to be a counter striker. And that could be potentially real problematic for Geoff Neal, who might also be hesitant to fight himself. I think this fight could be potentially boring, really. I think Ian Gary could be playing it safe for at least a round, and I think that Geoff Neal, if he fights anywhere like he usually fights, will be at a slower pace, and that first round will kind of drag by. Now, second and third round, it'll be up to Ian Gary to take risks if that is the case. Do you have any thoughts on that third matchup?
Yeah, Neal seems to be really dominant with his 1-2 punch. He has a southpaw stance, which could be an advantage for him. At the same time, though, I feel like Gary could potentially outplay Neal. He's pretty good footwork and range management. So I feel like if Gary can get Neal to punch him, and then he can. If he misses that punch, or if something happens and he finds him in an open stance, I feel like he'll be able to take advantage of that. And because of that, I think that that Gary's going to win by decision.
All right, with just 1 minute remaining in our time here, I'm going to do a quick run through of the last two fights. Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa. What Paulo Costa do we get? I think that is the question, because Paulo Costa, when he's shown that he's been ready, which we've not seen in a long time, he is an absolute gladiator, and it will be a showdown, but maybe this looks a little bit more like the Paulo Costa that fought Israel Adesanya, and Robert Whittaker gets a quick win after his knockout. But like I said, that question is for Whittaker as well. A quick knockout in his last fight, trying to get back quickly and start a win streak again, because simply age is not on his side. What is the mileage on Whittaker? Does he have any left? It worries me that he's just KO'd and coming into a fight with Paulo Costa, who is a heavy puncher. It does concern me. Moving on to our final fight, and I think this one is too much fun. Alexander Volkanovski takes on Ilia Topuria, and I gotta say, Topuria and Arman Tsarukyan, they're two fighters that I've had my eye on forever as kind of like the next up fighters. But with each round, Volkanovski, as long as he's still there, success is going to go up in each round that he remains, and he'll find success later and later into that fight. I expect Volkanovski to expect a pressure start from Ilia Topuria. But I got to be honest with you. I'm going to ride with my personal favorites on this one, so I'm not telling anybody to go off the cliff with me. But I think Ilia Topuria is the real deal. I think he's got it all. I think he's that new MMA brand of just anywhere you want to go in a cage, he is going to be there first. He's spectacular, and I think he gets the win. And that does it for the 5th episode of The Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. I invite users to be our very first followers on our newly created Instagram. That's The Blake and Jake Show, no spaces. If you only caught part of the show, but not the whole show, or maybe you want to hear the whole show over again, check us out on Spotify and YouTube at The Blake and Jake Show. It has been an absolute pleasure, and we hope to see you next week for another episode of The Blake and Jake Show at 2 p.m. on Wednesdays on KCOU 88.1 FM. Thank you so much for listening.